Are you ready?
Audio
Hi folks, and welcome to the Gridiron Report, a look at the top stories this week in Fredericksburg area high school football. I'm Mark Coleman from the Riverbend Sports Network. Joining me once again is Justin Rice from the Freelance Star, where he is the assistant sports editor. Justin, good to see you again.
This is getting to be a regular thing.
Yeah, I'm kind of liking this. Justin, of course, is part of the great crew of FLS Varsity, a new feature from the Freelance Star focusing on area high school athletics. To keep up with all of the latest in high school sports, log on to flsvarsity.com. Follow them on Twitter at FLSVarsity. Justin, the Twitter feeds have been burning up the last couple of days. We've been computing some playoff standings and scenarios.
Yeah, we're going through it and trying to figure out where people land and how it's going to fly, and it certainly generates a lot of interest. People want to know who to root for and who to root against here with the last week of the season here.
Well, and we hopefully going to have that all for you this week. We'll go in first to the games from last week. Let's take a look at the games from last week, starting with our game of the week, Mountain View hosting Riverbend. Mountain View all over Riverbend, 42-14. It produced our player of the week, Quentin Gray, who was just part of a big offensive explosion from the Wildcats.
Yeah, Mountain View has this three-headed offensive weapon. Gray at receiver, Gordon Collins at running back, and Elijah Burris. And those three can burn you for sure, and they make it tough for defenses. And this week was Gray's time. He's had a good season. He hasn't had quite the explosive game that he had this week, but Burris completes 13 passes, 11 to Gray, 230 yards, 216 to Gray, and of course his one touchdown pass goes to Gray as well.
Clearly his favorite target, at least on that night, but they have all put together good seasons.
Yeah, Gray, Mountain View has this little run of receivers coming through there, whether it's Anthony Johnson or Deshaun Hamilton and now Quentin Gray. These guys can certainly make a defense pay.
A nice legacy there. Congratulations to Quentin and the rest of the Wildcats, their big victory over Riverbend last week. So another three-headed beast, Cortland, took on Chancellor this past week. Let's take a look at that game. So another big rushing performance from Cortland's backfield, combining for over 300 yards. This is a pretty big offensive performance yet again. 2 weeks in a row, right?
Yeah, George Cheatham, Anton Jenkins, and Victor Green. Last week, all three over 100 yards. This week, all three over 100 yards, 344 total, 3 touchdowns. And this is the kind of game where you say, as Chancellor, rivals, they're going to show up and put on a performance. Cortland really took care of business, was in control from the outset.
And got the shutout, 34-0, Cortland over Chancellor. In another big rivalry game, Eastern View met Culpeper. Let's take a look at this one, Justin. Eastern View bouncing back from their loss last week. Big victory over Culpeper, 49-28.
Yeah, the Eastern View offense looks good again, and they sort of finish off Culpeper. The Blue Devils don't have a shot to make the playoffs now, whereas coming in it was win and maybe they make it. They're done. QB has another big game, and Eastern View looks sort of like they're back on track.
3 more touchdowns for QB. He's had a pretty good season.
Yeah, not a big yardage game this week, but still, he is certainly the force that drives that offense.
And Eastern View continues to roll. A big win for them this week. A big game coming up next week. In another late season rivalry game, it's always fun to watch these games late in the season there, Justin. James Monroe taking on Spotsylvania. At home, JM getting the job done. JM pulling off the 45-7 victory. And let's be honest, it really wasn't even all that close.
No, 35-0 at the half, and it was certainly all James Monroe. They really, limited Spotsy offensively. And man, Jay Scroggins, he's had quite a career since they lost to King George. The run he's been on individually has been outstanding, and with his feet, moving the pocket around, escaping trouble. Some of their biggest plays on Friday against Spotsy, it was when the pocket broke down and the play broke down. He was able to sort of make things happen. 132 rushing yards on 5 carries. That alone is great. And then he also has 200 passing yards.
3 passing touchdowns and another rushing touchdown. So he certainly figured into the scoring quite a bit.
Yeah, he's going to be, I think, the key for James Monroe, certainly. The running game probably hasn't been what they hoped, but Scroggins sort of gives them a chance every night out.
Another Battlefield District matchup, King George bouncing back from a loss last week, getting the job done against Caroline 45-14. This game was a little bit close through the first half, though.
Yeah, King George comes out sort of slow. It's 14-6 at the break. They actually deal with what looks like a really bad injury. Marquise Johnson has to be taken away on ambulance. Turns out he's fine.
Good.
May even play this week. But then they come back in the second half and 21 points in the third quarter unanswered and take firm control of this one.
Jordy Estes really was the difference maker in that.
Yeah, 3 touchdowns rushing, and then he has a 50-yard interception return. And a 4-touchdown week is it's hard to argue with that.
It'll get your name mentioned, certainly.
Yeah, you're certainly come up. Yeah.
Three touchdowns on 9 carries and breaking 100-yard mark. Pretty impressive performance there for Jordy, so congratulations to him. A couple of other impressive individual performances from this past week as well. Trey Cherry, there's a name that we've said several times.
Yeah.
Quarterback from Louisa, 24 carries, 142 yards rushing. And Lamar Lucas, running back from Colonial Beach, 24 carries, 133 yards rushing, and 2 touchdowns. So that's a look at the games from last week and some wonderful individual performances. 1 week left in the regular season, Justin, the playoff picture starting to come into view. Can you tell us a little bit about how VHSL calculates the playoff rankings?
Well, it takes an enormous spreadsheet on my part to sort of follow along. But the bottom line is you're going to score points in 2 ways. First of all, the bigger the team you're playing, the more points you score. By beating that team, you're scoring more points. So when you beat a 6A team, you score 26 points. When you lose to a 6A team, you score 14 points. And then that scale slides down as the team gets smaller. Talking about a single A team, it's 16 points for winning and 4 points for losing. And then the second component is, of course, the wins by your opponents. So Riverbend has 5 wins. When Massaponax beats Riverbend, they score 2 points for every one of Riverbend's wins. So Riverbend's won 5 games, Massaponax scored 10 points, and if Riverbend wins again, Massaponax would score 2 more points. So you want to play big schools, and you want to play big schools that win a lot of games.
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Are you ready?
So the 6A South is actually broken into 2 divisions. Conferences 1 and 2 play each other. Conferences 3 and 4 play. The top 8 from each of those 2 groups will make the playoffs. They'll play down to a final 2 from each of those 2 groups. They'll recombine into a final 4 that's reseeded based on the regular season rankings. Makes perfect sense, right?
I'm completely confused. What did you just say?
Let's just take a look at where we are right now with the Conference 3 and 4 standings in 6A South.
Yeah, I think you look at Verina. They're number 1 right now. Tough game to close out with. Highland Springs is a good 5A team. Verina wins that game. They're certainly number 1. It's not over yet, though. They lose that game. Hilton, Colonial Forge, both those teams have a chance to jump them. Hilton's another team, though, with the test. They've got Forest Park this week. Forest Park is a playoff team. They're 7-2. That's a game that should test the Bulldogs as well. And then Colonial Forge. The scenario for Colonial Forge to jump all the way up to number 1, it starts with Mountain View losing to Stafford, which
Unlikely. Possible, but unlikely.
possibly they're going to play, but it's probably unlikely. But that being said, Forest Park Hilton, that game is more of maybe a toss-up. Colonial Forge with a chance to jump up to number 2, be the 2 seed, and they would play 7. So then we look at the bottom half, 7, you have Woodbridge and you have Cosby tied for the last spot. For Riverbend, there's still a small glimmer of hope. It starts with, of course, first of all, you have to win this Friday. You've got to beat Colonial Forge. There's no other way. And then you need either Woodbridge or Cosby to lose, and Riverbend slides in 8, maybe 7, depending on the rider points. But they get in there, and, at that point, who knows what happens once you make the playoffs.
But it starts with a win for them.
Yeah.
And then finally, Stafford is mathematically eliminated.
Yeah, Stafford is eliminated from the playoffs, but, their game is certainly...
They can be a spoiler.
Well, with playing Mountain View, as it turns out, there are a lot of teams who are looking for, Stafford, having beaten Stafford. If Stafford gets a win, you're going to score 2 extra points. That's 0.2 rating points at the end of the year. There are a lot of teams who are saying, if Stafford could pull off an upset, we could use those 2 points.
Absolutely. Taking a look at the 5A North, things are a little bit more traditional here, Justin. The top 16 teams from the regular season make the playoffs. A lot more straightforward.
Yeah, 1's going to play 16, 2's going to play 15. Top 4 guaranteed 2 playoff games at home. Top 8 guaranteed, of course, just the 1.
Sure. Well, let's take a look at those standings. Massaponax certainly has distanced themselves from the rest of the field.
Yeah, the Panthers, just by playing that combination of a schedule where they're playing a lot of 6A teams, they're playing a lot of teams with wins, Colonial Forge, North Stafford, Cortland, Riverbend, teams that won a lot of games. It's allowed Massaponax to score a lot of power points, run up that rating pretty high. There's a pretty likely scenario where Massaponax doesn't even have to beat Brook Point this Friday, still end up number 1 in the region.
Coming off of the bye, though, they certainly want to have that win going into the playoffs.
Yeah, I think momentum is big.
Sure. Looking at the rest of the area teams, North Stafford has finished their season. There's still some rider points out there for them to scoop up.
Yeah, and that's what they're going to need to sort of hold off Mountain View. They've got to, Mountain View takes a hit by playing Stafford. Stafford has just the one win. It means it's not a big point lead for Mountain View, even with a victory. North Stafford is looking at teams like Petersburg playing Colonial Heights, James Monroe playing Cortland, Briarwood's even playing Tuscarora. Those are the games where, the teams that North Stafford has beaten, they can win, score North Stafford those extra 0.2 ratings points, sort of just hold off Mountain View in for the 4 spot, 5 spot, somewhere around there.
Right. And that is a big matchup. Tuscarora and Briarwood's will be battling it out in their last game of the season.
Yeah, I think Briarwood's wins, they probably jump Stonebridge and get up to 2. Tuscarora probably doesn't fall much lower than 4 or 5, somewhere around there. Neither one's going to fall out. And I like Stonebridge this week. They have Thomas Jefferson. I like them to win another game, and probably stay somewhere around 3-4ish.
Meanwhile, Brook Point, their playoff really start this week. They've got the number 1 seed, Massaponax. It's at home for Brook Point. They got to pull off the victory. Hey,
we're talking about a 2-win team. We're talking about the playoffs. That's the format. They're alive. And, you look at the teams ahead of them. Thomas Jefferson has Stonebridge. Thomas Edison, R.E. Lee Springfield. Are these teams that can also win a game? Probably not. So Brook Point is most likely in a scenario where if they beat Massaponax and get no other help whatsoever, I think Brook Point jumps up and ends up 14, 15, somewhere around there. You're in the playoffs. You got a game. Let's see what happens.
Well, they pull off a victory against Massaponax. They almost deserve to be in the playoffs.
Yeah, that would certainly be a big win for the Hawks.
Moving on to the 4A North, the top 3 spots pretty much wrapped up here, Justin. Shenandoah, Salem, and George Washington have pretty much tied up those top 3 spots. The next 3, though, right now, King George, Cortland, and Eastern View, still yet to be decided, right?
Yeah, I think King George and Cortland, King George took advantage of beating a slightly stronger opponent last week than Cortland. This week, the roles are reversed. King George has Chancellor, Cortland has James Monroe. Obviously, Cortland stands a chance to score more points than King George and probably slide back in up to 4, where again 4 is 2 home games as opposed to just 1 home game. I think that's a big difference. And then, Cortland, King George, those teams are also standing by. Shenandoah, Salem, George Washington, all 3 with games you really like them to win, but if somebody slips up, King George, Cortland are right there where they can sort of jump up.
Meanwhile, Eastern View probably has a home game to start the playoffs wrapped up as well, even with a loss.
Yeah, I think so. Kettle Run, even a loss to Kettle Run, you're going to score a good number of points, and it's just how you can't fall that far. Hanley, Woodgrove sort of hanging right there. Liberty maybe a little too far back to jump all the way up and catch Eastern View. I think the Cyclones certainly start the playoffs at home.
So some good representation from area schools in the top portion of the 4A North. Meanwhile, Louisa is fighting for one of their last playoff spots.
Yeah, Louisa has, they're sort of like Brook Point. You're going to play Monticello. Monticello is a team that you're not favored against. It's a 3A team, got a lot of wins. There's a lot of points to be had. Then you look at Pulaski playing George Washington. Maybe that's a team that falls back. Amherst playing Brookville. That's a team, fans around here are familiar with from all the games Brookville's played with JM.
Sure.
Maybe Amherst drops a game. Louisa's, they're going to need to win. They're going to need to upset Monticello and then hope somebody else that's already in the picture comes back to the pack.
Turning now to the 3A East, Lafayette certainly has distanced themselves from the pack here, Justin.
Yeah, by 0.1 points, Lafayette has secured the number 1 seed. They cannot lose it. Even if they get no rider points and they lose, there's no chance of them falling out of number 1. So there you go, Lafayette definitely number 1 here.
Loudon Valley certainly looks strong. James Monroe up there as well, though.
Yeah, and there is a scenario for James Monroe to catch Loudon Valley. It starts with James Wood upsetting Hamlin, huge upset, and Stafford upsetting Mountain View. Do those 2 things happen? probably unlikely. So I don't think James Monroe gets up to 2.
They probably don't fall very far either, though. So they certainly can rest assured they'll be playing a home playoff game this year.
Yeah,
at least one.
They will be at home. They're going to be a home team. The interesting part of the top half of the 3A East is that group from 3 to 6. James Monroe and Kettle Run tied right now. Central's right there. Pecoson's right there. I think any one of these 4 teams can land anywhere from 3 to 6, depending on how the week turns out and who wins and who loses.
Meanwhile, Spotsylvania's got a big game coming up. Probably not going to impact their positioning so much, but they've got an important game against Caroline.
Yeah, for Spotsylvania, mathematically, they're not a lock. There's certainly some crazy scenario where they could fall. The good news for Spotsylvania is the teams they're competing with are also not very good. So you talk about a whole host of teams that have to pull off monster upsets in the last week to score enough points to pass Spotsylvania, if the Knights were to lose to Caroline and fall. I think the Spotsy-Caroline game is actually way more interesting for Caroline at this point. Caroline needs to win, and they're going to need a couple teams to lose for them to jump up and make the 4A South half of the bracket.
Right. Meanwhile, Culpeper's season is over, and they probably have finished their season in terms of postseason hopes as well.
Yeah, the loss to Eastern View for Culpeper sort of definitely eliminated them. When you're not playing, rider points are great, and you can score them, but just not enough rider points to make up that difference.
Right.
And the same thing with Spotsy. The teams you're playing that are around you just aren't that good and aren't that strong. Nobody's going to put up a huge number. Culpeper is done.
Well, that's the 3A East. Finally, let's take a look at the 1A East. Justin, Alta Vista and Essex certainly are standing out in this conference.
Yeah, both tied. Essex had a solid win against Washington Lee. It was a great game on Saturday. And now these 2 teams are tied going into the last week. Essex with a big advantage, though. They've got 7-win Rappahannock. Alta Vista has 1 win William Campbell. I think that certainly is an Essex favor. If they both win, Essex is probably going to jump them both up and be the number 1 team in the region. Franklin also with 8 wins, a little farther back, and it's hard to imagine a scenario where Alta Vista and Essex both lose, and Franklin has a chance to jump up to the 1 spot.
Meanwhile, in terms of the area teams, Washington and Lee and Colonial Beach actually play each other this week.
Yeah, and this is one of the best rivalries in the area. These teams do not like each other. They want to win the game. This is a great rivalry, and it has real playoff implications for Washington and Lee. If they win, you're at home for the first week of the playoffs. That's what their Coach Yates, has said all season. You want to be home in that first round of the playoffs this year. Colonial Beach, I'm not sure that beating Washington Lee is enough unless they beat Washington Lee and then they get some help ahead of them where some teams that are already in that top 8 fall down.
The game will be played at Washington Lee, so in some ways it'll be their first playoff game at home. They win, they get to play another playoff game at home.
Yeah, certainly. I think the top 16 teams are set here. 1 through 16, but getting home games, especially in a region that's as sort of geographically spread out as the 1A East, you want to be at home. You want to avoid that long bus drive.
Well, there you have it. That's the playoff picture as we understand it thus far. Justin, I appreciate all the effort that you put into this. Obviously, there's quite a bit of time that's required to be able to sort this all out.
Yeah, it's time, it's pens, it's notepads. I'm sort of burning through them all, sort of figuring out possibilities and who can do what, and just applying that high school math.
It's fun to look at all the different scenarios, and certainly the fans love to think about the art of the possible, what might be able to occur should their team win coming Friday.
Yeah, it's fun to know, I think, on Friday night who you're going to cheer for or not. A lot of teams, the Stafford game, a lot of Stafford fans out there. That's 0.2 points for a lot of teams' rating at the end of the year. It's things like that I think make the last week really interesting.
Well, there you have it, folks. I hope that you've enjoyed our look at the playoffs this week. Certainly hope that you come back next week and we will preview week 1 of the playoffs around the region. For Justin Rice and the great folks from Freelance Star and FLS Varsity, I'm Mark Coleman from the Riverbend Sports Network. Thanks for watching, everyone.